The sun was setting over the quiet suburban neighborhood of Maplewood Estates, casting long shadows across the manicured lawns and perfectly aligned mailboxes. It was a place where every blade of grass seemed to know its place, and every house looked like it had been plucked from a catalog. But beneath the surface of this picturesque community, a storm was brewing. For years, the Maplewood Estates Homeowners Association, HOA, had been ruled with an iron fist by its president, Margaret Holloway. Margaret was a woman who thrived on control, her power derived from enforcing petty rules and regulations that she claimed were for the greater good of the community. She had a reputation for being ruthless, and no one dared to cross her. But Margaret had no idea that her reign of terror was about to come crashing down. At the heart of the storm was WD Carter, a quiet, unassuming man who had lived in Maplewood Estates for over a decade. WD was a veteran, having served 2 tours in Afghanistan before returning home to start a family. His father, Colonel James Carter, had been a decorated war hero, serving in Vietnam and earning numerous medals for his bravery. When Colonel Carter passed away, WD had erected a small memorial in his front yard to honor his father's memory. It was a simple wooden plaque, adorned with the American flag and a few of his father's medals. To WD, it was a sacred tribute to a man who had given everything for his country. But to Margaret Holloway, it was an eyesore. WD had always tried to avoid conflict with the HOA. He had received his fair share of passive-aggressive emails and violation notices over the years. His grass was too long. His mailbox was the wrong shade of beige. His trash cans were left out too long. But he had always gritted his teeth and complied, knowing that fighting back would only make things worse. But when he came home one evening to find his father's memorial missing, something inside him snapped. At first, he thought he was imagining things. He blinked, rubbed his eyes, and looked again. The memorial was gone. The wooden plaque, the flag, the medals, all of it had vanished. His heart sank as he scanned the yard, hoping against hope that it had just been moved or knocked over. But deep down, he knew the truth. His gaze snapped to the end of the street, where a garbage truck was idling, its mechanical arm lowering after dumping a fresh load into the compactor. WD's stomach churned as he realized what had happened. "No," he whispered, his voice barely audible. Then louder, "No." He sprinted toward the garbage truck, his boots pounding against the pavement. The workers, a middle-aged man in an orange vest and a younger guy in a stained baseball cap, turned to look at him as he approached. "Hey," WD shouted, his voice raw and desperate. "Did you pick up something from my porch? A wooden plaque with a flag and some medals?" The older worker hesitated, then sighed. "Yeah," he admitted reluctantly. "HOA told us it was debris. Said it was some old junk someone forgot to take down." WD felt like he had been punched in the gut. His father's memorial, his legacy, had been thrown away like trash. The rage that had been simmering beneath the surface for years finally boiled over. WD didn't remember driving to the HOA office. His mind was a blur, his hands shaking with fury as he gripped the steering wheel. When he arrived, he stormed through the glass doors, slamming them open so hard that the receptionist jumped in her seat. Margaret Holloway was sitting behind her massive mahogany desk, sipping a cup of coffee as if she didn't have a care in the world. She looked up as WD approached, her expression one of mild annoyance. "Can I help you?" she asked, her tone dripping with condescension. WD slammed his fists onto the counter, the sound echoing through the room. "Where is it?" he demanded, his voice low and dangerous. Margaret blinked, feigning ignorance. "Where is what, Mr. Carter?" "My father's memorial," WD growled through clenched teeth. "The one you threw in the trash." Margaret sighed, as if she were dealing with a particularly tiresome child. "Oh, that old wooden thing? It was an eyesore, Mr. Carter. It didn't comply with community guidelines. We have rules for a reason." WD's jaw clenched so tightly that his teeth ached. "You threw away a veteran's memorial," he said, his voice cracking with emotion. "A man who fought for this country, who bled for it. And you call it an eyesore?" Margaret rolled her eyes, leaning back in her chair. "Calm down, Mr. Carter. If we made an exception for every sentimental display, this neighborhood would look like a garage sale." WD's VY sound blurred at the edges, his heartbeat hammering in his chest. He wanted to flip her desk over, to shatter that stupid coffee mug just to wipe the smug expression off her face. But he didn't. Instead, he turned on his heel and walked out, his mind already racing with plans for revenge. WD didn't sleep that night. He sat in his living room, staring at the empty spot where his father's memorial had once stood. The rage inside him was no longer a wild fight, it was a hurricane, a tidal wave that threatened to consume everything in its path. He knew he couldn't fight this battle alone. He needed help, and he knew exactly who to call. He pulled out his phone and scrolled through his contacts until he found the number he had never thought he would actually use: General Michael Carter, his uncle and a retired four-star general. The line rang once, then twice. On the third ring, a deep, steady voice answered. General Carter speaking. WD swallowed hard, his throat tight. "Uncle Mike," he said, his voice hoarse. "I need your help." There was a slight pause on the other end. Then General Carter's tone sharpened. "What happened?" WD took a deep breath, forcing himself to stay calm. "The HOA," he said, his voice trembling with anger. "They threw away Dad's memorial. They called it debris." The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. WD could almost feel the shift in energy through the phone, the air around him thickening with tension. "Explain," General Carter said, his voice like steel. And WD did. He told his uncle everything: the wooden plaque, the folded flag, the medals, how the HOA had deemed it debris, how they had told the garbage crew it was junk, how Margaret Holloway had laughed it off. When he finished, there was another long silence. Then, in a voice so calm it was terrifying, General Carter spoke. "I'll handle it." WD exhaled, his shoulders dropping slightly. He knew that tone. It was the tone of a man going to war. The next morning, WD woke up to chaos. News vans lined the street, reporters swarming like bees to honey. Cameras, microphones, the whole 9 yards. WD hadn't even had his coffee yet. And then came the cherry on top. A military SUV pulled up to his house, black and government-issued. 2 uniformed officers stepped out first, followed by General Michael Carter himself. The man looked ready for battle, even in his civilian clothes. His broad frame, sharp gaze, and commanding presence made grown men shrink in his presence. WD grinned. Margaret Holloway had no idea what was coming. Margaret Holloway had always been in control. For years, she had ruled the HOA like a queen on a throne, dictating what color people could paint their houses, how many inches their grass could grow, and exactly how many approved seasonal decorations they could display. She thrived on the power, on the knowledge that no one would dare question her authority. But now, she was trapped. The lights were blinding, hot against her skin. The cameras were trained on her, capturing every nervous flick of her eyes, every twitch of her lips. The reporters surrounded her like vultures, microphones shoved forward, voices overlapping, each question hitting like a bullet. And across from her, standing tall and unmoving, was General Michael Carter. Margaret forced a tight, practiced smile. "This is a simple misunderstanding," she began, her voice an octave too high. She cleared her throat, trying to steady herself. "I assure you, the HOA was simply following community guidelines." The item in question was. General Carter took a step forward, and the air changed. It was like the pressure had shifted, like the world had just been thrown off balance. "You threw away a piece of American history," he said, his voice low, cold, and carrying the weight of a lifetime of service. "My brother didn't fight in Vietnam, so bureaucratic nobodies like you could treat his memory like garbage." Margaret flinched. The crowd erupted, murmurs turning to shouts. People craned their necks, whispering to each other, shaking their heads in disgust. Veterans in the crowd, men who had served, who knew what sacrifice truly meant, stared at her like she was the lowest of the low. The camera zoomed in, the news anchors murmuring dramatic commentary into their microphones. The reporters pounced. "Are you going to apologize?" one called out. "Will the HOA compensate the family?" Another pressed, her voice sharp. "How do you justify this insult to a veteran?" a third demanded. Margaret's breathing hitched. Her usual arrogance, her untouchable superiority, was crumbling in real time. And the world was watching. The fallout was instant. Within hours, the story exploded across the internet like wildfire. It was everywhere in TV, news websites, social media. Every major outlet picked it up, the headlines growing more damning by the minute. HOA throws Veterans Memorial in the trash, family outraged. Community board under fire for disrespecting war heroes' legacy. Pentagon responds to shocking HOA scandal. Officials condemn appalling act. The VYD didn't even have to refresh his phone. The notifications poured in. Veteran organizations were furious. They issued statements, launched petitions, flooded the HOA's inbox with demands for accountability. Twitter erupted with hashtags. The HOA scandal, the justice for James Carter, the respect our veterans. And then the Pentagon stepped in. A formal statement from the Department of Defense hit the press that afternoon. The United States military strongly condemns the desecration of any veterans memorial. We stand with the Carter family and all SARE VYC members who have honorably served this nation. The memory of those who fought for our freedoms must be upheld with dignity and respect. The VYD sat back, coffee in hand, watching the chaos unfold from his phone. Margaret Holloway was done. Her face was plastered across every major news station. Clips of her pathetic stammering excuses at the press conference played on repeat, side by side with footage of General Carter's cold, cutting words and the announcement of the federal investigation. The HOA tried to go silent, but it was too late. Their website crashed from the sheer volume of people flooding it, demanding answers. Their social media pages were locked down after receiving thousands of hate comments. They had nowhere to run. And then the real bombshell dropped. The VYD's phone buzzed with a new notification. He glanced down at the screen, his eyes scanning the headline. Breaking news. HOA under federal investigation for multiple veterans memorial removals. The VYD grinned. Oh, this just kept getting better. Because apparently, this wasn't the first time the HOA had disposed of veterans memorials in the name of community aesthetics. Oh no, this had been going on for years. Reporters dug deep into the HOA's past, and what they found was ugly. Multiple homeowners had filed complaints about missing military memorabilia flags, plaques, even entire monuments vanishing after the HOA deemed them non-compliant. The VYD scrolled through the reports, shaking his head in disbelief. They had gotten away with it for years. The only difference this time, they had messed with the wrong family. And now, they were about to pay big time. 2 days later, Margaret Holloway was gone. She hadn't gone down with dignity. There had been no grand speech, no carefully crafted farewell letter filled with fake humility and regret. No, she had been forced out. The HOA board had panicked under the pressure, their carefully curated world of petty power plays crumbling beneath the weight of federal scrutiny. Sponsors pulled out. Lawyers got involved. Angry homeowners who had once feared Margaret turned on her like a pack of wolves. And the final nail in the coffin? Her own board members voted for her removal. They held an emergency meeting behind closed doors, and within an hour, Margaret Holloway, the woman who had ruled the HOA with an iron fist for over a decade, was thrown out like last week's trash. The VYD should have felt satisfied. He should have felt VY indicated. But as he stood there, watching the news break across every major outlet, watching the former HOA president flee the neighborhood with her reputation in tatters, he realized something. It wasn't enough. Not for him. Not for his father. Because while Margaret Holloway could disappear into the shadows, licking her wounds and drowning in disgrace, his father's memorial was still gone. And that was something the VYD couldn't accept. The VYD stormed into the HOA office, now under new, terrified management, and slammed his hands down on the front desk. "Where's the memorial?" he demanded, his voice low and dangerous. The new HOA president, a frazzled middle-aged man who clearly wanted nothing to do with this mess, winced at the VYD's tone. "We're working on it," he said, adjusting his tie. "We've sent workers to dig through landfill records. We're calling the sanitation department, tracing where." The VYD's patience snapped. "Where is it?" The man flinched. Behind him, 2 HOA employees sat at their desks, typing furiously, scrolling through records, sweating bullets. But deep down, the VYD already knew the truth. The damage had been done. His father's memorial, the wooden plaque, the folded flag, the war medals, was gone. Lost forever. The VYD felt something inside him sink. For days, he had been running on rage, on the pure fire of getting justice. He had fought. He had won. But this was different. This was permanent. His fists clenched at his sides, his jaw tightened until his teeth ached. He forced himself to breathe through his nose, to keep it together, to not let the grief eat him alive. But then a voice spoke from behind him. "Mr. Carter." WD turned. A man in uniform, military, crisp, high-ranking, stood in the doorway. His expression was serious, but there was something steady in his gaze, something solid. WD straightened. "Yeah." The officer stepped forward. "We may have lost the original," he said, his voice measured and respectful. "But the Pentagon wants to give your father the honor he deserves." WD blinked. The words settled over him like a slow-moving storm. Then, for the first time in days, maybe weeks, he finally let himself breathe. A week later, WD stood in Arlington National Cemetery, the crisp autumn air settling around him like a heavy, unseen weight. The rows of white headstones stretched into the horizon, each marking the life of someone who had given everything for this country. Today, his father would take his place among them. It wasn't the way WD had imagined it. He had thought the wooden plaque would stand in their family forever, passed down just like the stories of Colonel James Carter's bravery. He had thought the medals, the folded flag, the diary filled with a soldier's thoughts, would be something he could show his future kids, something that would last. The HOA had taken that away. But they hadn't won. Because now, the entire nation was watching. The ceremony was nothing short of extraordinary. The Pentagon had gone all out, because this wasn't just about one soldier. This was about every veteran who had ever had their memory disrespected, about every family who had ever been forced to fight for the honor of their loved ones long after the war had ended. A full military color guard stood in formation. Soldiers in full dress uniform moved with perfect precision, every step measured, every motion deliberate. The sound of polished boots against the pavement was sharp, commanding, final. High-ranking military officials stood solemnly, their presence a silent acknowledgement that Colonel James Carter's name would not be erased. WD watched as a young officer stepped forward, carrying a pristine, tightly folded American flag in his gloved hands. His heart pounded in his chest, not from fear this time, not from the fire of battle or the bitterness of loss. This was something else, something heavier. The officer approached, his posture stiff with respect. He extended the flag toward WD, his gaze steady. "On behalf of the President of the United States Army, and a grateful nation," the officer said, his voice unwavering, "please accept this flag as a symbol of our appreciation for your father's honorable and faithful service." WD swallowed hard, his throat tightening as he reached out his hands, closing over the folded fabric. "Your father will never be forgotten," the officer added. WD nodded. He couldn't speak. He could barely breathe. Because in that moment, standing in the heart of Arlington, surrounded by those who understood what sacrifice meant, he knew it was true. Colonel James Carter was more than a man, more than a soldier. He was a legacy. And no amount of bureaucracy, no power-hungry HOA board, no one on this earth, could take that away. The final gut punch came when the HOA was forced to pay for every single penny of the ceremony. The cost of the military funeral, the new bronze plaque in Colonel James Carter's name, the special posthumous medal of recognition issued by the Pentagon itself, every last dollar came straight from their pockets. WD had made sure of that. And as he stood there, gripping the flag his father had once fought under, he couldn't help but let out a slow, satisfied breath. This was justice. The HOA was in shambles. Not just shaken, not just struggling. It was collapsing, disintegrating, imploding under the sheer weight of its own arrogance and corruption. The lawsuits came first, like a tsunami. They crashed down on what remained of the once powerful organization. Angry homeowners, military families, veteran advocacy groups, everyone wanted a piece. Some sued for damages, others sued for emotional distress. The biggest cases? Those came from the families who had also lost something to the HOA's never-ending obsession with community aesthetics. Because as it turned out, Colonel James Carter's memorial wasn't the first one they'd thrown away. The investigations uncovered years of HOA overreach, countless unreported removals of veteran displays, family tributes, even small plaques honoring loved ones. It had all been done quietly, under the guise of upholding community standards, buried in bureaucratic nonsense and vague policies. But now, it was all coming to light. The HOA was drowning, financially ruined, legally under siege, publicly shredded apart by every news outlet in the country. WD kept an eye on every single lawsuit, watched as HOA representatives scrambled, stuttered, tried to explain themselves in courtrooms packed with veterans, grieving families, and homeowners who were done being bullied. But the best part? The law changed. The outrage had reached Congress. Within weeks, new legislation was introduced at both state and federal levels, laws that ensured no HOA, no neighborhood association, no power-hungry suburban dictator would ever be able to touch a veteran's memorial again. It was permanent. No loopholes. No gray areas. From now on, any HOA caught interfering with a military tribute, no matter how big or small, would face severe legal consequences. And that was a Tory bigger than anything WD could have imagined. But as much as WD loved watching the HOA burn, there was one thing he enjoyed even more: watching Margaret Holloway fall. Margaret had spent years controlling others. She had built her reputation as the untouchable queen of the HOA, the woman who could make or break anyone in the neighborhood with a single complaint, a single fine, a single coldly worded email. She thrived on the power. She fed off the fear. And now, she had none of it. WD made sure her downfall was public. Every news article, every interview, every humiliating clip of her stammering through press conferences, sweating bullets as reporters tore her apart. She had no escape. She tried to issue a public apology, but no one cared. She tried to play the Tim, but the internet wasn't HOA-ing it. She tried to salvage what little was left of her career, but the damage was too deep. By the time the lawsuits were finished chewing her to pieces, she was a ghost. No one would hire her. No one would take her seriously. She was done. And then came the final cherry on top. Her own house was foreclosed. The HOA, her empire, her kingdom, her legacy of petty tyranny was so far in the red from lawsuits and legal fees that they couldn't pay their own debts. And Margaret Holloway, the woman who had fined homeowners for leaving their trash bins out too long, the woman who had threatened foreclosure over flower beds that didn't match the neighborhood palette, she lost everything. WD found out from a news article. The photo attached, Margaret standing in her front yard, watching as movers hauled her furniture away, her face twisted in shock, humiliation, and disbelief. WD had to grin. If that wasn't poetic justice, he didn't know what was. A few weeks later, WD stood in front of his father's new memorial. It wasn't the original wooden plaque, the one his family had cherished for generations. That had been lost forever. But what stood here now, this was bigger, stronger. A bronze plaque mounted on a stone pedestal, set in the heart of town. The inscription: Colonel James Carter, war hero, beloved father, defender of freedom, honored by the United States military. WD traced his fingers over the letters, feeling the cool metal beneath his fingertips. He let out a breath, slow and steady. Then he smiled. "We won, Dad," he whispered. And for the briefest moment, the wind shifted. A soft, warm breeze curled around him, rustling the trees, moving through the air like something alive. And maybe, just maybe, he could almost hear Ida's low, proud chuckle on the wind. If you were the one in this story, how would you react? Would you stand up and fight back, or accept the unreasonable pressure and control from the HOA? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe, like, and share this video with more people. Your small action gives us the motivation to keep bringing you more intense and engaging stories. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.